So welcome everybody to today's lecture on a topic that nobody really cares about: overcapacity in China. And the title is, of course, Fact or Fiction. And it's a very timely topic, obviously, on many levels. On the political front, we know that it has been part of the discussion both in the US, but also Europe, and increasingly in other parts of the world. And in all fairness, it is an issue that has been discussed in China as well. Okay, has been discussed in China as well, but that's on the political side. And I think what we try to do is, in the academic community, to bring things back down to facts and figures, and have a rigorous discussion on what the state of affairs are. Maybe we can have a discussion on what the key drivers are, and then we can have a discussion on what to do about it. So why does everybody care about this? I think it has to do with the fact that China is as big as it is. To give you an example, we know that when it comes to some of the sectors that are often identified with overcapacity, in the past it was steel. China is contributing about 16% to global steel exports. Of course, then we have solar panels, which I think is about 80%. We hear more about that. And there are many other areas. But if you look at other countries in the world, I'll pick one, let's say Ecuador. Ecuador controls about 30% of the banana market, but we don't really hear much about that particular part. So it's truly China's global footprint. And maybe China had overcapacity issues 30 years ago that were all internal, and probably the rest of the world wouldn't care. So part of the problem is that it is China's size. What happens in China has immediate implications for the rest of the world. And then, of course, it creates a dynamic of responses and counter responses. So I'm very happy that we will be able to discuss this topic today. But let me introduce you to our speaker, whom I'm very excited to have with us today, Chen Bo, or our Chinese friends, Prof Chen. He is currently Professor of Economics and Executive Director of the Institute of Free Trade Zone at Huazhong University of Science and Technology. But he's also a research associate of the Federal Reserve of Dallas and a distinguished fellow of the Jack Austin Center. What it means is that by definition, he is fully aware of the global discussion, not only the China focus. And it is reflected in the focus of his own interest and research. He focuses on international economics, on development economics, and obviously on China. He has published a large number of papers in highly respected peer-reviewed papers. He has been advising Chinese government agencies, but also in Canada and New Zealand. So I think we have with us somebody who truly cares about international economics, who has a strong background in these issues, and of course comes from China, so he has very much the context of where China is today. So with that, Chen Bo, maybe I can invite you to give us your thoughts. Let me please add to this. This is a public event. It is on record. So whatever you say is open to the public. Later on, throughout the discussions, before you ask questions, We'll have microphones around the tables and in the back. Please mention your name and your affiliation. So with that, thank you very much.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me, particularly Professor Schipke. And I know it's my great honor to be here to share my ideas about the overcapacity in China, which is perhaps one of the hottest topics these days in international economics, because this is a representative issue in the so-called China shock. I cannot call myself an expert in this kind of an issue, but I'm trying my best to give you my thoughts and my analysis on this issue, and all kind of comments and questions are welcome. Of course, these are my personal opinions. It does not represent any institute or any agency. Okay, here. Overcapacity problem actually is not a problem that just being brought up these days. It's been quite a long time ago since China started to worry about this kind of problem. Indeed, Chinese government itself actually brought up this kind of a serious question, serious problem. For example, in the annual state report, usually we call it in 2会 or 2 sessions in every spring in 2017. The then Premier Li Keqiang actually highlighted there are 5 priority tasks for the government in that year. And one of them, and the most important of them, as I have already highlighted in red, is cutting overcapacity. That means in 2017, the government has already confessed that the overcapacity problem in Chinese manufacturing sector was already had already been a very serious kind of a problem that we have to tackle with. Okay, and then why we call this a overcapacity? Is there any criteria that we can use to judge whether or not an economy, an industry has a so-called overcapacity kind of a problem? We have a kind of a so-called rule of thumb. Indeed, I have to say scientifically, there's no such kind of a very well-defined criteria for overcapacity. But the rule of thumb says if the production maximum capacity versus the actual demand is above 1.25, or let's say the other way around, which is if the demand is only about 80% or below of your maximum production capacity, then this industry or this whole economy is considered in the overcapacity situation. Let's look at usually we have a counterpart in our statistics, which is the industrial capacity utilization rate. And as you can see that after 2021, we are actually in some kind of a worsening situation. That is, our actual demand compared to our maximum production capacity has been sort of declining in a non-trivial way, I have to say. Well, and another way to reflect the overcapacity problem is from the PMI, the Production Managers Index, their perspectives. Typically, if we are in overcapacity situation, then the production managers will be worried about the future. So they would not like to expand their capacity. They would not like to invest more on building up their new capacities. So this will be reflected in the so-called index if they are not very optimistic about the future. So here we have the PMI, and as you know, the threshold is 50. If the PMI above 50 means in general the production managers are sort of optimistic about the future. They would like to invest more, hire more, and build up more production capacity or replace the existing ones. Otherwise, you will have the index below 50. And as we can see here, the purple one there is a red one and a purple one. The red one reflects the PMI for service sector, and the purple one is for manufacturing sector. As we can see, the manufacturing sector is somewhere just around 50. That means we are just on the edge of expansion or shrink, which typically means for a growing economy, which typically means in a recession, particularly for a developing country like China. Okay, so so the managers kind of perspectives already told you, the existing problem overcapacity. This is not a problem just for now. It's a problem for quite a long time. Okay. Well, but that's not actually the particular overcapacity problem that raised the international concerns these days. For example, Secretary Yellen and later the State Secretary, Mr. Blinken, they visited China this year, and both of them actually highlighted their very big concern on the Chinese overcapacity, particularly on some certain industries, which is this, the right. The left is traditional industries where China is worried about our overcapacity. Basically, just like Alfred just mentioned, steel. We have such kind of problem for quite a long time. But for the we call the new three. These are actually the new three industries are new in our overcapacity controversy. Basically, the new three refers to the new energy vehicles, NEVs, the lithium batteries, which is linked to the NEVs, as well as solar panel. Okay. So this is a very big difference between the Chinese kind of concern on overcapacity and the international concern, particularly the US concern on Chinese overcapacity. So when we're talking about overcapacity, we actually referring to two different kind of things. So why overcapacity is so controversial? I totally understand that our audience are not all economists. So let me just briefly, bring up some kind of a very basic concept. Overcapacity indeed is just a neutral word. It's not always bad, as we have thought. So, for example, overcapacity is a necessary condition for market competition. If you don't have overcapacity, you cannot sustain a market competition at all, because you cannot threaten your opponent or your competitor that if they raise the price, I will occupy your market because you've already limited by your capacity, right? So you have to have some kind of overcapacity or residual capacity on use so that you can use it as a threatening to your competitor. So that if everybody are doing so, then we have market competition. So overcapacity is indeed needed for the market competition. And also in practice, it's not a bad word either in many cases. For example, why do we have overcapacity? Indeed, the first reason is the demand is quite volatile in general. We know that the capacity has been built, and so that the production capacity typically is stable in the short run. When you build it, it's there, okay? But the demand is not always stable. The demand is quite volatile, even in the short run. So, in the short run, when the demand is down, the capacity is there, so that we will have, from time to time, we will have overcapacity kind of a phenomenon, sometimes quite serious. So the overcapacity problem may actually stem from the demand side, not the supply side. The second issue is actually also raised by Alfred just a moment ago, just a comment. Okay, what kind of demand are we talking about? The domestic demand or international demand? Okay, for example, when we are talking about domestic demand, of course, we know part of the Chinese general overcapacity problem stems from the sort of weak recovery of the Chinese economy in, as a whole after the pandemic, in the post-COVID kind of a period. Okay, the Chinese demand is very weak these days. So that's the reason why we have part of the reasons for we have so serious kind of overcapacity problem. The second is what should we focusing on? The demand domestically or the demand globally? Okay. Well, when we say you should focus on your domestic demand to make it your production capacity and demand sort of balanced. But this is quite ridiculous. If you think the overcapacity is your production capacity versus your domestic demand, then any exporter should be blamed. Because naturally, exporters have a overcapacity compared to their domestic demand. Okay, like the banana exported from Ecuador. Okay, or the gasoline powered cars from Germany or from Japan. Okay, they have all the overcapacity problem, or even chips. Okay, the overcapacity problem exists for most of the countries in the world. If you were talking about particular industries, you can always find so, because we are in the global economy. We're buying stuff where we have comparative disadvantage. We're selling stuff where we have a comparative advantage. So which is very simple. But here now, the Chinese actually accusation towards our new stream are actually using the domestic demand as a benchmark, saying, okay, look, you have such a small demand relative to your production capacity, so you have an overcapacity problem very seriously. Okay, and the third one is particularly referred to the Chinese case, the ownership. Okay, because when we are talking about overcapacity, when we are thinking that this is a bad kind of a phenomenon, which is a problem that one country generates to the rest of the world. Typically, the reason is that because you are boosting up your production because of industry policies. You provide your domestic producers some kind of unfair competitiveness. Okay, and in China, a very important channel for this kind of unfair competitiveness is the state-owned enterprises. Even though we may not have very clear, transparent kind of industry policies, but the SOEs still can enjoy some kind of benefit. Okay, because by definition, they can enjoy the support from government anytime they want because they are state-owned. Okay, and another issue for ownership is that should we care about the capacity within a country, but why by the owners of the other countries? For example, multinationals. Okay, if multinationals produce things in certain countries because of the global supply chain, then you will see all the countries involved in the supply chain for this industry will have overcapacity problem, more or less. Okay, then overcapacity will not be a problem if this problem exists in all countries involved. All right, so the ownership also matters. Okay, I give you another kind of number that you may understand the question a little bit better. That is, in China, we are now a net auto exporting countries. So the oil cars plus the battery cars, altogether we export. Last year we exported about 4.5 million cars worldwide, whereas a Japanese automaker, Toyota, just sold, I think, more than 10,000 autos last year. More than twice than the Chinese total export. Put all the brands together. Okay, so should we blame Japan or the Japanese automakers for overcapacity, or should we blame a certain country for overcapacity? That's the ownership kind of problem also exists. Particularly, it's important. We have to make clear about this because it's particularly important for the developing countries. Because many or significant part of their capacity is built up by the multinational, not by themselves. Okay, And fourthly, also very importantly, is that it is a kind of a not quite unusual issue for a new industry. So typically, if there's a new industry which has quite bright future, good perspectives, so that we will have a very huge amount of capital invested at the starting point. That is, if we carry the development of a certain industry into the starting stage, the maturing stage, and the other stage, you will typically find that in the starting stage, the capacity, the investment maybe is over the demand, over the size we needed. It's because everybody has a bright future about this industry, so the capital will be poured in. Okay, and the competition later will actually kick out some of the less productive ones, and the remaining ones eventually become the biggest player exists in the market. For example, in the States, I think in history, U.S. has more than 800 automakers, and now what you can hear is the big three, and perhaps with some very small ones, but just a few dozen in the U.S. U.S. owned automakers only a few dozens, but in history they have more than 800. That means because initially, when autos become a very convenient, tools for transportation, especially for individual transportation, then everybody thinks that it will have a very big return. So everybody would like to invest, and therefore a lot of investment occurred in that industry. We call over investment. It eventually leads to overcapacity in the early stage. Therefore, for this kind of phenomenon, it's not something unusual, and it's justified. Indeed, when we're talking about new industry, and the new energy cars are definitely fitting for the concept of new industries. So it's not there's no doubt that we have over investment and therefore over capacity. So and then about let's just explore this problem or question further. Let's look at from the international comparison, the overcapacity in general. Here I'm reporting the data from World Bank, which actually reports, the industrial utilization rate for each country every year in the manufacturing sector. China overall kind of utilization rate is 75.1. That means we are below 80. So, of course, during the rule of thumb, we are in a overcapacity situation. But interestingly,
can you indicate what date? What's the cutoff date for this?
That's the 2023. That's last year.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the annual report. That's the last year's kind of data. I'm sorry, it's a sort of missing here. I missed the data source. And here we find U.S. has exactly the same industry utilization rate as China, and India is even lower. For Germany and Canada, it's sort of okay in general. Okay.
How are the numbers generated?
Oh, it's a good question. I think from my understanding is that every member country of World Bank, they will report, the maximum production capacity they estimated every year, and also the sales number, so that they can calculate the industry utilization rate. Actually, when I present my work before, somebody questioned in China actually completed sort of the data to make the things less severe. I think typically we can't, because unless you believe that Chinese government systematically, consistently doing so. Otherwise, we can infer from previous kind of data, and also the sales data is publicly available. And then we can easily infer that if China makes our maximum capacity being volatile over time, that doesn't make any sense. So typically, I think for this kind of data is reliable. Okay, but anyway, that's reported by each member country. That is the Chinese data industry utilization rate is reported by the Chinese company for sure. Yes. But anyway, my talk is not based just for this, just on this kind of data. So this is the Chinese statistical yearbook. Just reporting more than 20 industries in manufacturing sector, so that you can look at the particular industries, industry by industry, about the industrial capacity utilization rate. And also, what I'm showing you on the last column is that the growth rate, like the percentage change, compared with the same quarter last year, okay, the same period last year. And as we can see, we have most of the industries, they have sort of the overcapacity problem using the 80% as a threshold. And for smelting and processing of ferrous metals, this refers to steel industry, basically. The traditional one that we have, overcapacity problem. And here, the automobiles, we have definitely very clear overcapacity problem. Compare if you are using the Chinese domestic demand as a benchmark. Yes, we have that. And also the changes on the last column, that is, we have, if it's negative percentage change, that means the overcapacity problem becomes more severe. If it's positive, that means we improve. That is, the overcapacity problem become less severe. Okay. Now the question is, why do we have this kind of a low utilization rate or overcapacity kind of a situation? All right. Particularly, for the auto industries. Okay. Before we talking about the industrial policies, the incentives given by the government. Okay. Are there any other reasons that can contribute to the overcapacity problem or low industrial utilization rate? First of all, I have already mentioned, because of the very volatile kind of a demand kind of a situation. The demand for certain industries can be highly unpredictable. Therefore, when you build up the capacity, aiming at certain market demand, but the realization of the market demand falls below your expectation, then you have overcapacity kind of problem. The second is macroeconomic shocks, like the business cycles, trade wars, the pandemics, etc. Okay, particularly for pandemic, nobody can expect that kind of shock occur. By definition, shock means something that you cannot expect at all, right? And this shock sometimes, unfortunately, becomes very big. So at the end of the day, it contributes to the overcapacity. When we have the invest in the production capacity, we are invest for not only the short run, we are invest for at least the medium run, okay, for at least the next 5 years. But the pandemic comes in and actually make the market demand shrink quite abruptly. Then this contributes to the overcapacity problem as well. And finally, I've already mentioned, because the new energy cars, the industry for new energy car is definitely a very typical kind of emerging industry, has emerging markets. And the technology become very quickly mature, so that it's convenient to drive a new EVs rather than the traditional cars upstream. For example, today, the Chinese big cities like Wuhan, Beijing, they have even the new energy cars without any kind of drivers. They have auto taxi in China, and it's new energy cars. It's just like we are actually talking about the possibility of having this kind of auto driven kind of taxis applied in China just about 2 or 3 years ago. We had thought that it would not be publicly used, or it will not be generally used in the next 10 years, because it requires so many details for safety problems, etc. But just in 3 years, already available. Not in rare cases, is available almost everywhere in the big cities in China. So the markets emerge very quickly. And also from the supply side, we know that there's something related to technology upgrading. Technology upgrading means once the technology actually being upgraded, you have to invest on the new capacity right away. Otherwise, you're going to be kicked out of the market very quickly. So you either take the market or you're being driven out of the market if you don't invest. Okay, so for a industry where we see very quick technological updates, we will see those very very significant overcapacity problems as well. Okay, the smartphone industry is one of the examples here, like in early 2000. Okay, when we all of a sudden find, oh, smartphone is so useful than the traditional cell phone, then people are starting to make smartphones. Like when I was a PhD student in Canada, I didn't experience the big booms in the Chinese smartphone market. But when I graduate and return to China, I surprisingly find actually a lot of Chinese brands emerged, like Xiaomi, Vivo, Huawei. And when I was a PhD student, I've heard of those names, but just in a few years, we become the worldwide producer for the smartphones. So if you are looking at the certain period for Chinese market, of course, we have overcapacity for smartphones. Okay, something related is over investment because of the market is emerging, because the technology upgrading is so quickly. So we have to keep on investing, and everybody just thinks of themselves about the market. They do not know what the market competition results yet. So everybody maybe based on their own information, they chose to invest a certain amount of money, but when we put them together, it's overinvestment for an emerging market. So at the end of the day, when overinvestment occurred, if you look back, then overcapacity problem actually arises. So far, I haven't talked about the industrial policies. And we all know that industrial policies are the main excuse for the accusations. Well, overcapacity is bad because it's stemmed from industrial policies. The government can help distort the market, competition rules, something like that. But even for industrial policies, they are not always unjustified. In cases, for example, if the industrial policies, they are just aiming at, promote the green technology, green products, then it's pretty much justified indeed. For example, there are global calls for climate change kind of control, for the carbon emission control, for the pollution control. So we are all calling up the switch from the traditional technology and traditional products to the green technology and green products. Okay, and new EVs is certainly one of the efforts that Chinese government is actually adopting to have such kind of switch in China. Okay, and also if these some certain industries are related to national security and welfare, then the industrial policies may also be justified, like chips, for example. So when U.S. invest so much on their chip acts, they are using this excuse. They say, oh, we are using industrial policy, but it's not bad because it's so related to our national security. So it's justified. So when I'm using the industrial policies, no problem about us. Okay, but when China is using that, well, there are a lot of problems. Okay, finally, if the industry is believed to have huge positive spillovers, then the government should step in. This is a very standard kind of economic kind of issue for externalities, to internalize the externalities. Okay, I don't want to discuss that very far on this front, but basically computer industry is considered to be a typical industry for this. If we know that when the computer has the upgrades, then it can benefit many other industries, or almost all the industries that based on computer or using computer intensity. Okay, so the government should step in and internalize the externalities, the positive externalities, and help the fast development of the computer industries. So these are very typical arguments for this one. So we have various kind of cases where the industry policies are justified rather than unjustified. When overcapacity is bad, we're talking about so many scenarios from demand side, from the supply side, even for the industrial policies that the overcapacity problem may not be an actual problem that we should worry about. But when it is bad, well, it is only bad if the government is pulling the public resources to help with certain industries and products to gain the outstanding competitive advantage over its competitors, particularly around the world. Okay. However, that's not the end of the story. It should also have a result that, if this monopoly power that the government gives to certain industries, to the certain producers, can gain the monopoly profits from the international markets, which can cover the initial investment, then the whole story can be completed. Otherwise, the government is considered to be stupid, right? You invest a lot, you help certain industries to gain some competitive advantage. But if the competitive advantage is so trivial, then why you should pull your public resources there, right? It doesn't make any sense, right? Many kind of examples here as well. For example, the steel industry in Brazil. Okay, we call it very typical kind of a story in the development economics. The government pool their public resources in helping the steel industries in Brazil, and at the end of the day, the industry remain as a baby or infant industry. Okay, never grow up. So the competitive advantage is just very trivial. So why do you want to do that at the beginning? Okay, you are just sort of like using a small amount of money to subsidize your producer and use a big fraction of your money to subsidize the foreign consumers at the end of the day. So it does not make sense unless your benefits to the producers can be big enough to for him or for them to win back, okay, your total initial investment. And this story, we also have a story can back up this kind of argument, which is the strategic trade policies designed for the competition between Airbus and Boeing. Okay, for that case, yes, it might be correct. But as I have already mentioned, even for the industrial policies that designed particularly for certain industries to gain competitive advantages, in many of the cases, the government cannot actually rationalize that. That is, basically, they have to give it up sooner or later. Okay, there are really rare cases. Eventually, the government's kind of intervention eventually help their own industries or producers to gain competitive advantage in the world market sustainably. Okay, therefore, indeed, overcapacity driven by industrial policies, I should say, is a rare case. Okay, that government eventually can make it a successful development story for itself at the expense of all other countries in the world. This is really rare in reality. Okay, in theory, it's also quite a high kind of very restrictive assumptions needed to satisfy this condition. But in real cases, we can find really rare kind of cases fit with this kind of argument. So for the steel industry, I don't want to argue too much because there's no kind of a controversy between China and the rest of the world. We have overcapacity problem in the steel industry because we produce more than half of the global steel output, and we export more than 15% of the global exports. Basically, all my data are just the 2023 kind of data. And the utilization of the steel industry was 77.3. Okay, still overcapacity, but not that much relatively. And the policy, why we have such a big production scale? Because we have a persistent kind of industrial policy during 2000 to 2015, like more than 16 years kind of industrial policies to deliberately enhance the production capacity of the steel industry. We're trying to update the equipment scale, expanding the production scale, and also merging the smaller producers into larger entities. etc. The government actually very deeply involved in the development of the steel industry, eventually make this industry has the overcapacity problem. Okay, where the Chinese government realized and actually reversed the policies in 2016 and brought up the problem in public in 2017. Okay, that's the story. But for the new energy vehicle industry, which is kind of a focus these days, okay, then the problem, the story may be very largely different. Okay, first of all, if you are just talking about overall utilization rate, particularly for the new energy vehicles, yes, it's very serious because the overall utilization rate is 65. And when we are talking about new EVs, our estimation is about only 50. So that means about half of the Chinese new energy vehicles cannot be absorbed by the Chinese market itself. Okay, it has to be sold somewhere else in the world. Okay. However, let's just look at this industry from the very beginning. China began its development of the electronic vehicles like a very typical EVs actually from more than 2 decades ago in 1990s. Primarily for two reasons. The first reason is we want to reduce our heavy reliance on gas and oil because, as we know, China is the biggest importer for the oil. Okay, maybe these days the oil price is acceptable, but think about the case in early 2000, the price for oil just raised very quickly. Okay, which poses a very big cost burden to the Chinese manufacturing sector. So at that time, the Chinese government has already realized that if we can find some new energies that can replace the oil, which would be strategically important for the Chinese sustainable development. So that's the reason why. That's the first reason that Chinese government wants to use the substitute for oil for energy input. Okay, that's the first reason. The second reason is about the air pollution. Okay, the air pollution in China, particularly in early 2010s, was very severe. Okay, indeed, Alfred, you talk about you were actually teaching in the National School of Development, NSD. Actually, I was offered this chance as well. But my wife actually rejected this offer for me immediately. After she visited Beijing with me. At the time, it's 2012. The air pollution, the PM2. These two are perfect substitute or almost perfect substitute. So they share the same market. So when we're talking about overcapacity, we should be very, very careful about the definition for the market demand. What is the market demand? Indeed. And one more concern about the Chinese automobiles is that, some countries, they accuse Chinese government that use some kind of non-transparent industrial policies, particularly for the SOEs, the state-owned enterprises. But let's look at this. Okay, the two very typical industries where we have overcapacity problems. I'm using, for example, the two traditional industries where the Chinese government also admits we have the overcapacity problem: steel and coal. Okay, and look at the ownership of the top 5 producers. Okay. 3 out of the 5 in steel industries, they are state-owned. And I have to give you a warning that the top 1 actually is the biggest. It's actually the Baowu Steel company is actually the solo output of this company. If you put this as a single country's export, it's already the world's largest exporter. So this one is very concentrated. Okay? But even we are talking about top 5, 3 out of the 5 are just the state-owned. And when we are talking about the coal industry, it's all state-owned. Yeah, so we have the very typical overcapacity problem, which we consider to be bad. That government actually use the interventions that is not for the national welfare and not for the welfare of the rest of the world. Okay, they stop market and jeopardize our welfare improvement. So it's bad. Okay, yeah. But when we are talking about new 3, things are changing. Okay, look at the ownership for new EVs. Okay, basically joint venture refers to non-state-owned enterprises. Okay, we have only 2 state-owned enterprises in the new EVs in the top 5. Okay, and for the lithium, we have only 1 state-owned. Okay, when we're talking about solar panel, none of them state-owned. They're all private ones or joint ventures with the foreign investors. Okay, so it's pretty much market oriented, and the government, if they have any industry policies, supposed to be fair to everybody. They don't have any non-transparent kind of support for particular enterprises because they are not state-owned at all. Okay. Oh, let me just before we advance to the next slide, I want to tell you the most recent kind of policy against the Chinese New Year. As we all know, the U.S. actually already sanctioned the Chinese New Year by 100%, previously 25%, and now it's 100%. EU actually following very quickly and have the so-called temporary kind of penalty tariff policies towards the Chinese New Year, even though we are still in negotiation. But the temporary one is firm specific, not for the whole industry. For example, put 38% for this one, for steak. This is state-owned new makers. Okay, but it's not here. But for Geely, a private one, it's I think it's 18%. Okay, and for the biggest auto new EV maker, BYD, is 16.8%. Considering the average tariff before the penalty is 10%, so 16.8 is okay, not a big deal. 38% is relatively high. Okay, but still compared with US, it's very small kind of penalty. Okay, so
quick question: are these ranked by value or by sale?
It's by the sales. The value of the sales, like we estimate how much you sell in terms of R&D. And finally, let me just provide you some kind of data from the third party to support my argument. That is, the new EV development is actually the Chinese effort in develop our clean technology related kind of production. Okay, because China suffers so much from the air pollution and the other kind of pollutions. So here, this is the International Energy Association's report for the investment for the clean energy sector. Okay, this is the estimation for 2024, just for this year. China is here. China's investment is here. We actually invest 3.7 times more in new clean energies sectors than the fossil fuels. Okay, whereas you can look at the case for Europe, North America. Okay, the relatively they invest much less. Okay, so we are the country that is sticking to our promise for climate change. We are the country that's sticking to our switch from the traditional production and technology to green products and technology. That's also the data from IEA. Okay, the fact is, okay, no matter what our argument is, the fact is that we are under sanctions, unfortunately, as I have already mentioned. Now, for the new EVs, previously we've already under sanction by the states because of trade war, 25%. Now it's 100%. So for the lithium, previously 7.5%. Now it's lithium battery is 25%. for the solar panel, previously 25%, now 50%. Okay, indeed, that's very kind of surprising to the international observers. Why? Because for the new EVs, we know that US is also a very competitive producer like a Tesla in the world. And indeed, China only export 13,000 new EVs to US market, just about 1% of the Chinese global export, and a very negligible part of the US new EV markets. So why we are threatening to the states? They cannot use this kind of excuse. The only excuse they're using that is that we are actually posing a kind of a potential threat to the US market because of national security, because we use some kind of a very advanced technology in 5G or something like that. And also, they saying that this is unfair, so they are using some precautionary kind of protection for the US market, something like that. But it's quite ridiculous because in EU, we've already export more than 300,000 EVs to their markets, a much bigger kind of sales in EU. But EU's kind of tariff penalty compared with US is very small. Okay, so we can using EU as a benchmark. The US ones above the EU ones is actually the part unrelated to the economic concerns, which are actually the political concerns. Overcapacity problem raised by US is pretty much a China threatening kind of story. I can use. Yeah, even if you truly believe that in China we have overcapacity problem that stems from unfair kind of a practice by the government intervention, but when we are using EU's kind of a measure against the Chinese new energy vehicles, compared with US, the outstanding US policy can be, attributed to the political kind of concern, which I believe, therefore, is the China threatening kind of idea. Make this a very hot issue these days between China and the US. One more kind of evidence I can share with you is because of the USMCA. USMCA says that you can not only imports using the kind of very low tariffs from non-market oriented economies like China. You have also pay attention to the imports of intermediate products. So at the end of the day, when China are trying to build like BYD build up our factories in Mexico, Mexican government has been forced to impose 40% of the tariffs on the intermediate parts exported from China to our factories, BYD factory in Mexico. So this is pretty much a critical concern. Therefore, as a concluding remarks, what I want to say is that the overcapacity indeed exists in China if you look at the overall industrial utilization rate. Yes, we have some kind of problems for sure. While the overcapacity in steel and coal industries are justified, those in new three, they are quite controversial, I think. The overcapacity in new EVs, for example, stems from declining market demand, domestic demand, from the overinvestment in the early stage of such kind of industry, and also due to the fast technological development. So these are, I think, the major reasons for overcapacity or explain overcapacity kind of a phenomenon in the new three in China, particularly for the new energy vehicles. And the industrial policies are importantly contributing to the overcapacities for the in the new EVs. I also agree with that, but I think those policies generally in line with the global course for adopting green technology and green energy. Okay, so which are also justified. And therefore, my conclusion is the allegation against Chinese new trees, particularly for the new EVs, might be mainly driven by protectionism and from EU and geopolitical tensions from US, plus protectionism. Therefore, that's my concluding remarks. But I would like to just give you some kind of a bonus because we would like to discuss further about what China should do, the policy suggestions. So I would like to provide some to address your to grab your thoughts, to lay up your thoughts. The first one is that for China, what we should do, first of all, it's not a pure economic issue anymore. So we have to accept the facts. First of all, I think the extension of production chains to other countries are necessary, particularly for the final products. It's necessary, it's inevitable. That is, we have to build up more factories in other countries for the final outputs of the cars, sort of like what the Japanese automakers experienced in the 1970s when Japan and the US engaged in the trade war, particularly in the war for automobiles. And secondly, voluntary export quotas to certain markets are a better solution than trade war, because at least the penalties are actually raised by the Chinese government, not the foreign government. So we can, anyway, the excuse is that we may sell too many of our cars there, but let's restrict ourselves, okay? And the third is that exploring the third-party markets, such as Belt and Road Initiative markets, is strategically important. And now we've already seen a big discussion and big investment activities of the Chinese automakers and other producers. I think currently the hottest destination for our attempt to explore the third-party markets is West Asia. Okay, and Southeast Asian, including Singapore, is definitely one of the hottest place all the time. Fourthly, restoring and complying with international rules on competition, avoiding controversial industry policies are also necessary. Just let me conclude with my concluding remarks. Okay, the last sentence is I quote from our third planner. Is that the English word? Okay, from our recent accomplished third planner here is that we should try ourselves to comply with the international rules, advance the development of WTO. That is facing the unilateralism of the United States and particularly facing a very possible second term of Donald Trump. We have to fight against the unilateralism. Okay, so multilateralism represented by WTO is actually the best solution to China. So let's comply and let's advocate the development of such international organizations. At least we have some certain rules that is fair to everybody. Okay, I think that maybe that's all for my presentation, and all comments are welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for what I thought was an excellent presentation, and will certainly stimulate quite a bit of discussion here. I think especially your last point about what can be done to maintain the global governance structure as it relates to trade and ultimate investment. This of course could have come from Singapore, which is a strong defender of the global order. But let me just highlight a few things of what I've heard, ask one or two questions, and then open the floor for discussion. So I personally very much liked the way you started out what we call almost like a taxonomy on the two issues, which is overcapacity, the different pockets one can think of overcapacity, and the other one is the different rationales for industrial policy. I think that is very important in today's debate to kind of bring the supposedly complexity down to something where we can systematically discuss the different pockets as opposed to putting everything in the same basket. Now, when it comes to the argument, especially as it relates to EVs, and you highlighted very much this emerging industries, and of course now alludes to the broader climate discussion. I think here you didn't dwell on one of the issues that is a big criticism that most countries, especially Western countries, articulate, and that is, maybe one would grant that at the time when a new industry emerges, by definition, there would be overcapacity for some time. The problem is exit. And I would argue that is probably has been the biggest problem in China in all of the industries that were faced with overcapacity, starting from steel, coal, but increasingly also the new sectors. And so I wonder, how you would respond to the criticism that at the end of the day, while temporarily have overcapacity, you don't let the market ultimately decide about the winners and losers. So there are basically no losers. And somewhat related to that is when it comes to industrial policy, that of course is another lecture or seminar. There are of course many aspects to it. And in the Chinese context, of course, the world is a little bit more nebulous. To give you an example, so exit. How do you allow companies to exit? Well, as long as you continue financing them, they'll continue to exist. But here, the distinction between SOEs and private companies might not always be the right thing either. If you're operating, a private company operates in a particular locality in China, and that company ultimately needs to exit. But again, the financial system is already highly exposed to it. There is, of course, less of a willingness to let the company fail, which ultimately would spill it back to the banking sector, and then it becomes a big problem. So there is this continuous rollover, or we would call it today infection of the financial sector that is related to the overcapacity. So again, the whole concept of facilitating exit of non-performing company in a way that is not disruptive, right? But in an organized manner. That is probably, in my view, but I would like to hear your views, probably one of the biggest criticism that one could make, even if you accept everything else that you have said. Then maybe one part for our discussion, maybe at the end, is a little bit on China's position in the world and being such a large, in a certain kind of way, very efficient a country and economy to come up with new products. Let's call them EVs. The development is so quick that the rest of the world doesn't have any time to adjust. The example that I'd like to give you to bring it down to specifics is, let's go to Europe. Let's suppose China truly has the best EVs. There is no industrial policy that one could criticize. It should be the sector where China is going to be the banana exporter. So China is going to export all the EVs in the world. Europe, the car companies, and I give you one example, Germany, contributes 10% to employment, the broader sector. If overnight China has an industry that would wipe out the entire sector in a different country, whether that's Germany, it could be other industries in other countries. From a political economy point of view, that is impossible. So again, this is not related to the pure economic part, but given China's role in the world, one wonders, and I think you did that at the end with your last slide, by kind of starting on, okay, how do we deal with this? Whatever the reason is, how should we go forward? And I think you pointed out rightly so, in a certain kind of way, maybe the next decade or so, if it is not for other political obstacles, you will see more Chinese foreign investments in the rest of the world, because associated with the threat that comes from China to other countries is, of course, the loss of jobs. And by extension, for some countries like the US, mostly the US, it is, of course, the threat not to have a manufacturing sector, and then that is directly linked to national security. So maybe these are just a few questions and thought from my side, and then we'll open up the floor.
Okay. Thank you very much for this very valuable kind of comments, questions. I think for the first question, it's a very good question for the exit kind of policies. Yeah, we even if we cannot justify our industrial policies, but all those kind of policies should have a time kind of framework, or should have a active strategy or standard there. Otherwise, when we keep on subsidizing these kind of industry or companies, they will always be national losers. They will feel unfair. So that's actually a kind of a situation related to more like the Chinese kind of SOE reform, also proposed in 2016 and 2017. In the proposal for the reform of SOEs, we are talking about the exit strategies for the zombie companies, particularly for the SOEs, which are related to your question here. These are actually very important. I think the first thing that Chinese government has already realized and accepted is that we will actually have a so-called a quitting kind of a strategy in the industrial policies, particularly for the new EVs. Indeed, we tried to quit about 4 years ago. That is, for example, before that, we actually subsidized the firms who are selling the new EVs. We subsidized heavily for their sales. And then in 2020, our proposal is we cut our initial kind of a support to only 30%. The subsidy reduced by 70%. And we would like to, completely exit from those kind of a subsidy in 3 years. But as we all know, 2020 was a year that we encountered the pandemic. So the government actually, rather than cutting the remaining, actually increased it by, to the 50% or 70%. I cannot remember more than that. Remember the more details. But that's actually a problem. But this problem has already been understood by the Chinese government. They know they should quit sooner or later. And also, no government in the world actually has unlimited kind of public resources, particularly for China these days. We are lacking our funds almost everywhere. We have a very big kind of income cost for the government employees. So that this already means we have a budget limit as well. So the government will definitely facing, especially together, facing this pressure from EU and US, China. I think the Chinese government has realized and will quit from this kind of subsidy programs for new EVs very soon. And that's a very direct kind of response. And particularly, we are now negotiating with EU. I guess this is part of the agreement. This would be part of the agreement, if any, with EU before November, which is the deadline for their temporary policy. Okay, so I guess the Chinese government has already understood it and prepared for the exit strategies. But what about the zombie companies? But that's related, but sort of a broader kind of a question for the zombie companies, because the Chinese government, as you know, we are in a sort of economic circle. We are like in a recession. So government is so keen on the unemployment data. So yes, I agree that for the government, local government, and the banks, they may try to support those zombie companies for the sake of the employment. But with very limited public resources these days, I doubt how much they can do now than ever before. So for the zombie companies, I guess it will be more difficult, but for political reasons. But I guess they will have to do it for the exit of the non-well-performed companies, regardless of the ownership as well. For the second question, yeah, you're right. I've already mentioned in my last slide. Even though I think economically we can argue that the current Chinese policies and the development for new EVs are pretty much justified, but the China shock is actually is prevalent these days. And we have to think in a kind of a political economic way. That is, we do threaten the industries of the traditionally strong countries in the auto industry. So we have to. That's the reason why we have to look at the case of Japan and the U.S. in the 1970s as our example. We have to do something to prevent it from escalating, particularly between China and the EU. I'm not mentioning U.S. because I think there's little China can do on that front. But from between China and the EU, yes, we can do that, like voluntary export quotas. We have to invest perhaps more in other countries so that all the other countries can also benefit in terms of the employment, exports, etc., and also share the burden of pressure on China as well. And finally, we perhaps can strike down or we can unfreeze the CAI, the comprehensive agreement on investment between China and the EU, so that the German companies can produce their automobiles in China just in a bigger scale. I think currently they are already doing so. So that we can all enjoy our comparative advantages or something like that. So anyway, this is what China should do to make it eventually a win-win game rather than kind of a zero-sum game, because the geopolitical tension in China is quite severe. Everybody needs to admit the reality, so that China, if we want to keep our player roles in the international game, we have to create a win-win game kind of a scheme rather than the zero-sum kind of a scheme, because the latter is definitely not sustainable anymore.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there are a few questions. Who wants to go first? Again? You have a phone.
Thank you.
It's for the video recording.
Right, sure, yeah. Thank you, Prof. Really, really excellent presentation. I thought if I might, I could make 3 points. The first is relatively technical, about what you use capacity utilization as a way to try and, in a very valuable way, think about the economics of overcapacity. But I want to suggest that that might not be the most productive thing to do. Humbly suggest that. One is that, we have to think about America and the EU criticizing on overcapacity, on China's overcapacity, not because they love China, not because they're filled with the milk of human kindness to make China's economy better. So when they criticize China for its overcapacity, they're not worrying about capacity utilization rates, which is a way for an industry to think about whether it's using its resources well. Even if whatever China's capacity utilization rate turns out to be, what they're concerned about is how much China is exporting of this stuff to them. You see, so even if China's capacity utilization rate were 100%, but the last 20% of that comprise export to them, they would still be complaining. It's not the capacity utilization rate that is critical. So I think that's very helpful. Macroeconomists have used capacity utilization rate to think about business cycles, whether the economy is healthy, but I don't think that's what the issue here is. Let me go on to my second point, which is what I do think the issue is. The issue is, can America or the EU make a case that China is dumping excessively what it produces on them? Is China selling these things in such a way that China then has a beachhead and then can use a monopolistic advantage to wipe out their industries? That's really, seems to me, what is critical about overcapacity. So on dumping, you had some statistics that talked about that. Brenda Spencer is a nice reference. But it seems to me that you can also bring out how, for instance, last year, all the new auto sales in America, only 2% were Chinese EVs.
Right.
Okay. China exports only 14% of the automobiles it produces, compared to Japan, 50%.
Yes.
Japan exports 10 million cars, China, 3 million or 4 million. So it seems to me that you ought to be making the case that way. Another thing you could do is document how the price for China's EVs in the US and in the EU are actually higher than the price of these things in China. They're not dumping. They're still selling and gaining a nice profit. I think there are a number of things to be made there on the second point. And then, of course, my third point is I like very much your constructive suggestion on what China can do. But let me suggest a slightly different spin on it. Not inconsistent, but slightly different. Part of China's narrative is every country should have the right to have its people grow prosperous. No country out there should try and contain any other country. All of us can sign up to this. Every country signs up. But I would like to say that it is also the case that every country ought to have the right not to live in insecurity of economic immiseration, not to live in insecurity. And so if you view that, and I know it's difficult to view America in a sympathetic light these days, for many of the things it does. But if you try and view America then, for America, the China shock is not just an economic thing. For them, it's losing jobs, ghost towns emerging out of what were once thriving middle-class communities, entire industries being shuttered up. They are living in hopeless insecurity. Now, I think that one thing we could do to move away from zero-sum or prisoner's dilemma type thinking to win-win is we can say, what can China do, given that it is winning the economic game, to help allay other countries' insecurity? That would be the real win-win outcome. I think your statement about investment is a good one, and that would be very helpful. That, I think, is one of the most successful of what the strategies that Japan executes. But thank you very much. This is a wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's a very valuable comments as well. Yeah, I'm trying to improve my presentations accordingly. So for the you're right. I also agree. They are the international community definitely concerned more on China's exports rather than the comprehensive utilization rate. But it's related. When we utilize our capacity in a low way, that we have to export the residual kind of products outside of market. So they are sort of related, but that's not the direct way addressing the international concern. So that's the reason why I also mentioned, but actually the emphasis on exports. Yeah, for sure. So that, and also for the dumping kind of cases, indeed, when we are looking at the accusation on China's new three, they are sort of different. For solar panel, yes, they are calling it dumping. But for new EVs and lithium batteries, they are calling it, those kind of subsidy, unfair kind of government subsidy, sort of thing like that. It's just because what you already mentioned, they want to, because of especially from US, they want to, you can also call it a protective or defend. Kind of a defensive kind of actions on China, or they want to sort of economically contain China, whatever you call. They just want to use a legal excuse. If one is not legal, then they're trying to use another. And that's the reason why even for the new three, they're using different excuse. The reason why they are not using dumping accusation on Chinese new EVs is because the price in China is not higher than the price internationally. Otherwise, they will use something excuse as well. I don't think that's the mainly important thing because I think for US it's mainly political driven. It's not economically driven. But you're right. I also cite the number that China only export a very trivial fraction of the US auto markets. So it's not a threat to them at all for the moment. So you can at most call it a kind of a precautionary measure to block the Chinese threat or to protect themselves. Yes, but you're right. I can add more sort of the data, especially the comparison between China and the US, the Japanese exports to US in automobiles to address this kind of issue, to make it clearer to the audience that this is really driven by political concerns, not economic concerns, as they cite. Okay, the last one is well, I totally agree. I don't want to argue with that. I think the Chinese government should think about how to make it a win-win game because we are already in this situation. We are not in a fair world anyway. So we have to think in a practical way how to make ourselves a survivor in the globalization. If we want to live in the globalization at all, then we have to make it a win-win game, cases by cases. So investment abroad, build up the supply chain internationally, and also have kind of a joint research or something like that. Always solicited or should be solicited by the Chinese government.
Thank you very much. And I think the last point, I think also, Danny, what you mentioned is it is helpful to think about second and third best solutions, taking into account political realities. I think maybe that distinguishes the Lee Kuan Yew School from an academic econ department where you have the ability to just assume. I think here we try to take into account political realities and then come up with what might be second or third best solutions. Did you have a question?
Do we still?
Absolutely.
We still. I want to make 2 points. One is, first, I want to thank you and the Danny's participation. I'm in very broad agreement with the narratives, and I find the discussion very stimulating, and thank you. I want to make 2 points. The first one is that, can we complete the argument, add one more part to the discussion? I think one can, I'm not believing what I'm saying, but I want to make a point for completeness' sake. One possibility is that the international community is worried that China is exporting its domestic destruction to the rest of the world. I can think of from many, many years ago, when China began to produce vitamin C, they say that there's excess capacity because why? Of all the destructions, government subsidy, low cost of capital, on and on. And previously, they used the same argument against Japan too, about the lower cost of capital, which is essentially we have to complete the discussion to add the point about whether China has domestic destruction and is China's fast rise in the manufacturing sector exporting as domestic destruction. The second question is about building on Danny's point. I mean, what we have is really a world in transition. There are a lot of developing of new sectors, new industries, and also change in production location of old manufacturing facilities. And so it's really about accommodating a very big country that's growing very fast. And what's the best way to handle this? I'm not so sure if the voluntary export restraint kind of thing will work, because voluntary export restraint is actually locating the tariff earnings, the tariff gains to the producer, right. And it doesn't have their importing countries at all. And we know that. And maybe from that perspective, the tariff is a way to extract producer surplus from China. And that may be a reason, if I can make an argument to say that this would be a reasonable way to deal with these shifting in production locations. But there could be really many other things to deal with it, which I think the multilateralism is really important. It's really important that we set up a more concrete, manageable escape clause in our trade agreements. In the old GATT, we have the escape clause. I think it may be time to really think about that. Then I also am worried about if excess capacity is an issue. I really worry about exporting production capacities. Wouldn't that add more to the excess capacity? And also, if I move the factories to third world and so on and so forth, it is not helping the US and the Europeans. So from that perspective, I worry about two of your suggestions. One is the export restraint. The other one is locating production facilities outside. These are not going to solve the problem of accommodating China's presence and fast-growing presence in manufacturing.
I think I have I just realized I have this microphone. Thank you so much about your comments. And you are right. Actually, I agree with you that for the moment, I sort of mentioned actually one of the reasons for overcapacity is that the Chinese economic weak recovery contributes to the overcapacity problems. The domestic demand is weak. So the producers, even without government national strategies, the producers naturally try to find a way to deal with its residual output that is selling this abroad. They're trying their best. And I agree, this is what the international communities, particularly US and EU, are worried. But for this is, I think, to solve this problem, the only way, fundamental way, is trying to boost up the Chinese domestic demand. It's not an industry-wide kind of a policy that can solve this problem. It's a overall macroeconomic policy that can eventually help us to alleviate this kind of a problem.
But if the distortion is a governance issue, you have to face up to the issue.
Right.
The rushing of productions and so on.
Yeah, but this is mainly because of the distortion, because of industrial policies. Then, of course, the government should step in and not step in, should step out. I think and make the market, make the industry become more market oriented. And this is, as I mentioned, I think the Chinese government has already realized how important it is. Like it or not, they have to step out this new market. I believe this is now on the table when China and the EU are negotiating for the solutions.
I believe that actually in the third panel, that the government mentioned that it's going to manage the central and the local relationship is in industrial policies and national development. I think China is willing to face the existing distortion in the system and is trying to amend to it. I thought this is something that's worth a while to bring to the world community for discussion. I think for me, it's about owning our issues and telling the world how we're dealing with it is a good thing.
I totally agree. And also, this is another big question: how to, handle the development of a country as big as China, especially in nowadays. There are only a few kind of promising industries that can still have this kind of very good perspectives. I think it's sort of related to the questions I answered before. Yes,
but is this enough?
Maybe we should just go around the table. You mentioned the third panel. I think it is actually interesting. The document had actually a few pieces in there. Among others, for the first time, it mentions the word exit.
Right.
And it does mention strengthening bankruptcy. The question though is these are slow-moving trains. The implementation of changes in any country are politically difficult to do, and they take, of course, time. But in terms of recognizing that you have to facilitate the exit, it has addressed it. So at least that's very promising. But I wanted to give others a chance to ask a question. Please feel free to use a microphone, or there's a microphone in the back.
Thank you for your presentation. First, I'd like to say that I agree with you that much of the accusations based on China are political in nature. And we cannot really cover up the fact that the tensions, between China and the West, namely the US, are building up. And perhaps because it's not even productive to discuss this aspect, because leaderships on both sides are drawing a certain direction, and since they're not going to change on the China side, or if Trump is indeed going to be elected on the US side, then the trajectory is not very positive one. However, talking from a bit of an economic point of view and discussing the role of the state in government and the government in industrial policy in China, and specifically what you showed about the EVs, having 2 state companies out of the top 5, that's a lot. And in addition, we know that state involvement does not stop with state-owned enterprises. Right? The state involvement with the private sector is deepening and is a cause for concern, both with levers such as access to credit, etc., and directly through party cells in the management of those companies. And so, from a Western point of view, looking at the government involvement, it's not just state and non-state. It's also how does the state influence the private sector? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's also quite controversial. That's the reason why when I mentioned the ownership, I said it's on top of the industrial policies. What you mentioned is actually even the SOEs, the private ones, they may enjoy the government support, but that's supposed to be industrial policies that are available to all the domestic makers, all the domestic producers. So, but the SOEs can enjoy additional non-transparent kind of a support from government. That's what I want to say. So, but for the new EVs, yes, we do have some kind of SOEs, but the majority of them, they are actually private ones from joint ventures. They are just enjoy those kind of industry policies that is transparent to everybody and also fair to everybody. But for that part, I've already addressed that is because it's justified because it's the Chinese effort to reduce the pollution, and it's adopting the green technology and the green products. Of course, this is also about the strengths, how much you should help your domestic producers, your producers, for gaining, the winning the technology markets for this. This is another, I think, another issue is to what degree we should support our industries for this kind of efforts for the green development. I think perhaps in the negotiation with EU and also in case of the Chinese pressure from abroad, we eventually probably will set up this kind of rules like to regulate the internationally to regulate the degree of the industrial policy that we can use in terms of the green development. That's something I totally agree that we probably should do in the future to sort of make the game more justifiable to everybody. Please.
Any other questions, comments, short speeches?
Should China consider appreciating renminbi?
Should China consider appreciating renminbi to curb this kind of trading balance,
Well,
or to alleviate the tension with Western countries?
I think this is a very good question. Indeed, we've been debating within the expert group in China for quite a long time, because the one related kind of question is, why don't China using the fiscal policy extensively to stimulate the economy? Because when we are using that, apparently we are under the pressure of appreciating our RMB. So if you think it the other way around, the government may think the best strategy is to keep the RMB as low as now, so that we can make our exporters still enjoy the international market. So I think for this question, maybe they will not just think about the situation in some particular industry, but they have to think about the whole nationwide kind of exporting situation. So personally, I think we should, using our fiscal policies, do not worry about the appreciation of RMB, which eventually can help us to alleviate the pressure on our new EVs and other new industries. But I think that currently the government may not have a very strong face on that. But definitely, having a strong face or not on appreciation of the RMB definitely has little to do with the concern on the new three kind of pressure, I think.
Maybe to add, that was one. Maybe to add that, if you look at the markets right now, the RMB should be more depreciated because the economy is in a very weak position, and the only way you can counter that is by providing additional fiscal support. I think that is probably what is required in order to close the output gap that currently exists. Ultimately, the economy is still very, very, very weak, but institutionally, so far, the government has not been willing to do a lot more on the fiscal side. Any other question? Maybe one more. Yeah. There's a microphone right whichever you want to take.
Since nobody is asking any questions, yeah, I'll take the last one. So you mentioned that China is looking at going back to the WTO, looking at some semblance of normalcy to trade, and is actually looking at the CPTPP. But I mean, bearing in mind that Japan, Mexico, and Canada are still in the CPTPP, so China's membership, if it even manages to meet the requirements, will also have to overcome those hurdles. But looking at just China's intent, I think not many people are very convinced that China is genuinely keen to join the CPTPP, and a lot of its moves are more performative rather than actual intention. And but then again, you see certain reforms in China, you see certain moves made in Hong Kong that actually try to understand, try to rely on some of the requirements of the CPTPP. So I'm quite curious to see what your thoughts are. Is China serious? How possible do you think it can be, and what do you think China hopes to get out of it? Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's also a very hot question these days. So first of all, China is now realize how important the WTO court is, because in the past we don't like them because I think the rules are there and built up by US, which is not in favor of China, like as a developing countries. All these arguments are completely gone in China now, because we know that without the curve, without the court, without the kind of arbitrage kind of a group, we are in the worst scenario, because US can do whatever they want. So that's the reason why China now calling up the international rules. Because no matter what kind of international rules, it's better than the unilateral rules posed by US. That's especially when we're talking about trade war. So Chinese face on reforming WTO to reconstruct the WTO kind of arbitrage group or export group on fair trade is undoubtable. We are trying our best to make it work as soon as possible. So as for the CPTPP, yes, I've already heard many kind of skepticism about the Chinese kind of intention to attend CPTPP because it seems that those requirements are higher than the Chinese current kind of standard, and whether or not China would like to do this kind of ambitious reform to meet the requirements is still questionable. But as I mentioned, because we've already suffered so much from the trade war with US, it's not the first best, definitely, for China to adopt the rules of the CPTPP, but it's definitely the second or third best, considering we are in the trade war, even beyond that, geopolitical tensions with US. Chinese intention is very clear. The most important intention for China is to retain us in the global, in the globalization, in the global game, and make us still benefit from the globalization. So we want to fight against the unilateralism against US. Many attempts, such as CPTPP, would be useful. So this is a cost I think the Chinese government would like to pay. And also, I don't think we should worry about whether or not China has the face to meet the requirements or to actually stick to the requirements of CPTPP, because we have various kind of measures to punish or to prevent the member countries deviate from its commitment. So I really don't worry about that. If China says we are interested in joining CPTPP, I think they mean it. Okay, and you can use the institutions to prevent China from deviation. Yeah.
Thank you very much for, again, a very good presentation, very good discussions. I think to be continued, because it's not going to go away, and we probably have to have an event after November 9th is the election. But anyways, thank you for joining us today, and good afternoon.